All right, we are back with the Here to Their Wellness podcast. If you're coming in for our second episode, oh, I'm still so excited about it all. But we really appreciate you coming back. Hopefully, you heard something in the first one that you liked, and we're here to kind of expand out a little bit more. Megan, I still can't believe we're doing a podcast. It's so crazy.
I know.
It's awesome.
Something that Kyle and I had talked about for a long time, and I never really figured out a way to make it work.
Yeah, now we're jumping on it. I think it is definitely it's cool to kind of reach different audiences, different people. So, and,
I think so too.
And that's our hope with this too, is that you're listening in, and we'll hit something along the topics that we go through that really resonates with you, and keep you coming back, which is the hope. But so this week.
Also, wait, hold on. If anyone has a topic that they want to talk about, you're absolutely more than welcome to put a message below or to send us a message off the website or on social media. We would like to get to a point where this is more interactive once we get a bigger fan base, but it's definitely something. If you've got something you want to hear about from us, just tell us.
Definitely. Or questions about things we go over. It's definitely, like Megan's saying, more interactive, the better for us. So this week, last week we went into a little intro about Here to Their Wellness, what Megan's mission is and what we're doing and what we hope to achieve with this podcast. But we also wanted to give a little bit more insight into, just like kind of, I feel like it's obvious. I look at Megan as like a superhero, and every good superhero has a good origin story. So we wanted to give the listeners a little insight into kind of where Megan's coming from, what her motivation was in starting to get into psychology, and where that originated with her. So that's what we're going to be going over in this episode. So for us, just to start out here, so Megan, I feel like we could just, like we said last week, I feel like we go into this for a long time, but to kind of start out, what was your childhood like? Is that a good place to start, you think?
I think that's probably a really good place to start. So my childhood was a little bit different than a lot of kids my age because of my birth order. So my mom and my dad had 3 kids. I have 2 sisters and a brother, and they were 13. My brother was 13 and a half, and my sisters, they were 16 and 17, I believe, when I was born. So nowadays that's a weird thing, but back then it was very unusual. So I developed traits of the only and of the youngest, which is it's quite if you know anything about birth order, it's quite the combination of the two. Yeah. Parts of my childhood were totally amazing and wonderful and awesome, and other parts of it were a little bit dark, or maybe a lot of it dark. Mm-hmm. So I definitely have a trauma history, the details of which are I do not have access to the details, but what I do know, and I have this, is in my baby book, it says in my mother's handwriting, terrified of teenage boys when I was 3 years old. And I was so afraid of teenage boys growing up that I remember when I got to about, I think, 5th grade, maybe, I realized that I needed to overcome that fear, because if I didn't, I was going to have a really hard time in high school. And so I desensitized myself to them because I was petrified of them. Like getting on the bus with them was terrifying for me.
Oh, so interesting. Little things like that you don't even think about, right? Like people do it every day, but as a child, that's hard.
Yeah. I learned the importance of desensitizing early on, and I don't know, it wasn't taught to me. Most of the stuff that my belief structure, nobody taught me. It's just the collective unconscious that I, for whatever reason, have had access to in some variation since I was very, very young. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely guided and shaped a lot of my decision making, even when I was little.
And just real quick, go into that. If there are listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with it, but can you tell us a little bit about like desensitizing? Obviously, it's like a self-explanatory word, but just like in the terms of trauma and dealing, just kind of what that looks like for people.
So when I was working through the stuff with teenage boys, I would so before I worked through it, I would maybe not intentionally, but like right below the surface intentionally walk on the other side of the street if I saw teenage boys coming, or I would just make sure that there was space. And so what I started doing was I started intentionally being near them. So intentionally walking on the same side of the street, intentionally walking past the teenage boy's house on, on the street I grew up on. And just sort of kind of muscled through it to the point I got comfortable. And then by the time I was in, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, I was around teenage boys all the time because that was my age group. So I didn't really have a whole lot of a choice. And so it kind of normalized itself a little bit too. But another example of desensitizing is an experience I had with my father. My father passed away. He passed away when I was, 20 years ago. And when I was little, he had juvenile diabetes, and it was not very well regulated. But for whatever reason, back in the day, diabetes was a big secret. So nobody knew about it. Nobody talked about it. It was literally the secret in my family. And the only reason my siblings knew about it was because two of them were snooping around my parents' room one day and found needles. And the way the story was told to me, that I remember anyway, is that they got scared that our father was a drug addict. So they confronted my mom, and my mom's like, "Oh no, he's just has diabetes." And then they never talked about it again. So,
which of course back then was such a sweep under the rug, like different, I think with a lot of different medical cases, which is crazy to think about. I mean, you hear those kind of stories where it's
totally,
people just kind of hide it until it's too late. And then all of a sudden, they have 3 weeks to live or whatever the dramatic circumstances could be.
Right. So for us, what happened was my father, so he wasn't very good at regulating his insulin. And I don't know how much of that is because of just where medicine was with diabetes, how much, he was or was not paying attention. I know that he didn't always eat or drink what he should be eating and drinking, what I know about diabetes. So it was really unregulated. He would have insulin reactions. And what my mother would do is she would take orange juice and sugar and spoon it to him as opposed to calling 911. This went on for my whole growing up years. And that was okay because my mom was a stay-at-home mom until I was in third grade. And then once my mom went back to work, I was home alone with my dad often. Like I'd come home from school and he'd be home, or I'd be home from school and he would come home. And I started witnessing these reactions, and I didn't know what to do because I was like a kid, like little. And so I started calling 911, and it was never ever discussed in my house. No one in my family that I can recall ever sat me down and said, "Okay, this is what this is. This is what happens. This is what you need to do." No one. I just said, "Well, clearly there's a problem. I need to get help." It got so bad that the head of rescue in my hometown ended up calling me on the phone and talking to me about it because my father would always refuse to go to the hospital. They wanted to make sure that I had the supports that I needed. They wanted to make sure that my father had the supports that he needed. And again, they didn't address my mother, they addressed me. So around this time, I decided that I thought this was stupid. And I thought that having this be this huge, big secret wasn't helpful for anybody. And so I decided to get my father to talk about it. I had never heard him say the word diabetes. And again, I think I was 12, and balls of steel. I still think about it. I can't believe I did it, but I just remember it was Easter time, and I sat down with him and I said, "I need you to say the word diabetes." And he looked at me and he said, "What did you just say to me?" And I said, "I need you to say the word diabetes." And he was furious. Oh my God. He's probably never been so angry at me. And I just kept pressing it until he said it through like these gritted, angry teeth. And then after he said it, I said, "Okay, that's all I needed right now." And then I walked away. And that was really the beginning of, he was really, really angry. And I guess for a long time, according to my family, but it ended up being, I was the only person he talked to about diabetes. He would talk to me about it freely and openly by the time I was an adult. And so I figured out somehow, I guess, again, the collective unconscious, that this exposure, that like getting people to talk about these things that they're so afraid of or that are so hurtful to them and to the people that they love is really the best way to do it. And you start slow, you push just hard enough to get to the edge, and then you let them stay at the edge for a second while you know it's super uncomfortable, and then you back off. that's something that I've done in treatment for, the whole time I've been practicing. And you learn, the better you know, for me anyway, the better I know a client, that I know how hard I can push, but more importantly, I know when I need to stop. I can tell by the tone in their voice, by, when we used to be in person, by their body language, I could feel it energetically. And so then when I'd get them to that place, we'd stop. And sometimes, people will call and we'll have a session and they'll say, I don't want to talk about anything heavy. Okay. They've been pushed and pushed and pushed and they need a break. I have no problem with that either. So,
wow. And what like a revelation at the age of 12 to have that ability to, I guess I would say, like, read people. I mean, the person who's, closest to you and your family. And then be like perfecting that, for years and years of how to read people, like you're saying, read the body language. Whether it's your client or whether it's a friend, I'm sure it's something that you're constantly like absorbing other people's like words and actions when they're around you.
Words, actions, energy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So that was like, and again, and you and your father, after that, you had, your relationship had grown pretty close, right? You guys had
oh my God, my father. Yeah, no, my dad was one of my best friends. And when he died, it was devastating for me. It was just devastating. And he had been sick. He had cancer. He had colon cancer. So he basically had the same kind of cancer had the same kind of cancer that he had. And he got diagnosed in, I forget, 99 or 2000, got diagnosed in January and was gone by August. So I got to spend about a week with him that summer. And then and then we all went home. The whole family came out, and then to kind of say our last goodbyes. And then we all left, and then we were all back a few weeks later because he died. So,
and that's really, it's so crazy when you do develop that bond, especially I think at that age, when a lot of kids are kind of getting further away from their parents. And it really is, I was talking to one of my friends about this. It's funny, you go from like being your parents' best friend to fighting them during your teenage years to then again wanting to be their best friend. Like that like cycle of like, they're your closest person and then you're pushing them away. But in this case, it was like you find this out about him after, of course, taking care of him for so long. And it just brings you closer and closer together. And this is also, this is in Megan's book, I'm That Girl. You really can see, it'll be linked in the bio here too. You can really see the relationship with your dad, I think, as it blossoms, as it grows, as there's like the speed bumps along the way. It's great. It's so great to hear how you talk about him in that book.
Right. So during my teenage years, which this actually goes back to the whole idea of addiction. So during my teenage years, we did not get along. I didn't, because of all of this stuff, and because he was angry at me because I made him talk about it, and I was just really unhappy. I had, this, I mean, I'll just fly through the history really quickly, but I had my, I experienced my first suicidal ideation when I was probably around the same age, 11 or 12. And again, I hadn't known anybody who had done it. I don't have any idea where I got the idea. I have no idea. And so all of these things kind of culminated around the same time. So I'm starting to have some mental health issues. My father is ill. He doesn't like me. I don't like him. My mother and I are struggling. My brother and my sisters are out of the house living their lives because they're so much older than me. And so it got really weird in my house during my teenage years. And then I want to say when I was 16, maybe a little bit younger, I developed bronchitis, and I was given, this is the beginning. I was given cough medicine with codeine the first time. And I took it once and I said, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. And I powered through that cough medicine so fast. And that was the beginning of me realizing that opiates were something that really, really did it for me. I didn't have access to them for years, but years later, I got my hands on them, and that definitely started a trajectory that I hadn't really expected. So when I was a kid, when I was in my early 20s, we experimented with all sorts of drugs, but we definitely, there's a handful of us who got really into opiates. People overdosing. I've saved people's lives. It's pretty terrifying. And then I got cleaned up after I graduated college, And then I was in a car accident. And after the car accident, I was diagnosed as a chronic pain patient. And so they put me on methadone. And there's a whole big long situation with the whole methadone thing and who was my original prescriber. But so I ended up getting addicted to methadone and had to. So I've withdrawn from street heroin. I've withdrawn from methadone, and I will tell you that withdrawing from methadone is about 6 trillion times worse. And it's because when you take a pharmaceutical, the pharmaceutical is literally designed to fit into that neuroreceptor. And so when we're using just street heroin or some kind of opiate that's not coming from a lab, that fit isn't so perfect. I mean, it's a great fit, but it's not perfect. Man, you get pharmaceuticals in there and that fit into that neurotransmitter could not be tighter. And so withdrawing from that, and this is anyone I've talked to who's withdrawn from street drugs versus pharmaceuticals, it is almost night and day. It's absolutely horrific.
And it's crafted
and so
for
even
that,
now,
right?
Yes. Well, so
like
methadone,
you're saying in a lab.
Yes. So methadone is used for a bunch of things. I am absolutely opposed to using methadone as a long-term form of chronic pain management, and largely because of my own experience. I don't think that I've got, again, we talked about this last time, I don't think that I've got these magical abilities to not manage chronic pain without opiates, but apparently it's not as common as I would think. And people got really angry when I started researching getting off of opiates. People got really mad at me when I started suggesting that perhaps there were alternatives to pain management besides opiates. They yelled, like boards, like opiate boards, they yelled at me. Oh, they were so pissed. Like, who the fuck do you think you are to tell us to get off opiates? Oh, it's awful.
Well, and for them too, I mean, beyond obviously the research that they have to back it up, it's a big, benefit for them financially, right? If they can keep that in the systems.
Oh my God, yeah.
So when we're talking about, of course, the timeline for you, what were the big factors for you getting cleaned up? Was it somebody in your life? Was it your own personal, like pulling yourself up from your bootstraps? Like what was that motivation every time that you were able to?
Really good question. I think it was really just about taking a hard look at what I was doing and deciding if this was really the direction I wanted to go. And there were times when it was the direction I wanted to go. So I allowed the behavior to continue, whatever it was. And when I got to a point where I decided the behavior or the habit or the coping strategy or whatever was no longer serving me, I would just start making changes. I didn't care today and get opiates if I wanted to. When I got off the methadone, I said, I don't want to keep doing this. I don't want to continue to have to use a pharmaceutical for the rest of my life, because that was the direction I was headed. That's anybody who's on any kind of pain management, that's what happens. Like methadone was the top of the line. Like you don't change to something else, at least back then. And I just said, I can't keep doing this. There's got to be an alternative. There has to be an alternative. So I started getting much more into the idea of self-healing and diet and exercise, and just really taking care of my body in a way that I hadn't done. And I haven't always, I mean, geez, by a long shot, but over the years, I've definitely learned that the better care I take of my body, the better my body functions. Which sounds so stupid. Like, of course that's true, but people have a hard time with that, especially because taking care of our bodies is not always fun or easy.
Well, it's facing a lot, right? And I think it's easy to read that in a magazine or to, hear it from somebody else. But when you really experience it for yourself, or you like you said, you make that conscious decision, you're looking at the man in the mirror.
Right. It's a conscious decision every day, every moment. When I have conversations with people about being happy, so happy people aren't just happy. That's not how it works. It's a conscious decision every second of every day. Happy people have moments where they fall apart, or they don't want to be happy, or they want to sit and sulk. And that's okay. I tell people that all the time. It's okay if you need to sulk. It's okay if you need to be mad. It's okay if you need to feel sad. Like, all of those things are okay. Feel the feels you've got, because if you don't allow yourself to feel them, they're not going to go anywhere. But the problem is when people stay in that place, or they refuse to believe they have the power and control to get out of that place. And then they get stuck there, and then they're miserable.
Yeah. And it's like
And
they say the sorry, the bad days make the good days feel better. You know, like that.
Mm-hmm.
That comparison to have something to, or like in your circumstance, in your situation, that past, to have that to look back on and say, you know, look how far I've come, and to help other people get to that same place, you know, to be like, listen, there is a way, there is hope, there are bad days, there are days when you're like, how am I going to do this? But, you know, how to push through it and how to have those tools for yourself.
Yeah, it's so funny because I don't look at it as like, oh, look how far I've come. It's so lateral to me. And these were just and I probably sound like I'm minimizing a bit, but they're just the experiences that I went through that got me to where I am today. And as we kind of talked about last time, these experiences are what made me want to do my job and make me, you know, at least pretty good at my job. I mean, I have clients who've stayed with me for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think about how if I hadn't had if I had been missing any of the experiences that I've had, it's the butterfly effect. I wouldn't be who I am today, and I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do as effectively as people tell me I do it. I mean, it's hard as a therapist. It's hard for me to judge my own work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think the fact that you have, like you're saying, long-term clients and a pretty full roster, and you know, people who want to keep coming back to you, it definitely is reflectant of that.
Sometimes it just feels like people don't want to change. So
yeah.
It's just easier to keep the same therapist.
Yeah.
rather than have to look for somebody new.
No. So just to real quick to tie it back to like even what we're saying in the beginning. So do you think having, now that we know a little more insight into like kind of the road path of addiction you've had, do you think having the siblings that were so much older than you made you feel like you wanted to grow up quickly, or you wanted to just kind of be there right away?
Oh yes. Oh, I always was trying to catch up. And I remember when my oldest sister got married, again, I was probably, I think I was in like 5th or 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly that was a pretty monumental period of time for me. But I remember she got married on New Year's Day, and she had this beautiful church and this beautiful ceremony. And my other sister and I were in the wedding, and we had these gorgeous dresses, and it was just beautiful. And it was magical because it was like Christmas time-ish, and it was just so pretty. And I remember the rehearsal dinner, and after the rehearsal dinner, it was New Year's Eve. So everybody went out except for me because I was a
12.
Child. And I was 12. And I remember having to stay at the hotel with my parents and just being so sad and just feeling so unincluded. And my brother and my sisters would at times definitely work to make me feel included, but it was a hard reach for everybody because the age spread was so great. It was so vast. And, my parents didn't have a lot of role models to look at. Oh, how do you parent a 17-year-old and a baby? Like, how does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's everywhere. That's not uncommon at all. And back then it was a novelty. I remember when one of my friend's parents had a baby between her, and we were in, I think, probably 7th grade. 7th grade, they had another baby, and how it was the first person that we knew whose parents had another baby. Like, it was just bizarre to us. And I just remember thinking, oh, that's me. I was that baby.
That's
what a weird way to, so my brother and my sisters would often parent me, which how could you not? I mean, it just was weird.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to catch up with them so badly. And they will never, I don't think they will ever look at me. I mean, they logically know I'm an adult, but I think that I will always be the little sister.
Mm-hmm. And we actually the little that's one of our serendipitous circles that intertwine. I'm the youngest of 4 by 10 years. All my siblings are like 10 years older than me, which isn't as big of a gap as you and your siblings, but the same kind of effect of like there's a funny story with us of like I refused to have training wheels on my bike even at that age because like all my siblings didn't have training wheels, so that kind of thing. And it's like me learning to ride a bike without training wheels, and they're like, you're just making this harder for yourself. But little things, like little things like that you always are just kind of the little one who's fighting a little bit. And similarly, this kind of idea now to prove yourself as I'm saying quotation marks adult. I still feel like I'm figuring that part out too. But
so I'm I'm old and I still feel like I'm figuring that part out.
Yeah. I feel like that's recurring, especially with the pandemic. I feel like everyone's like, are we adults or am I just eating cheese in my pajamas? I don't know. Somewhere in between. And do you have, is there an addiction? Does it run your family? Is it something that anyone in your family has had to work through in the past or that you know of?
So that would really depend on who you ask. So, and what your definition of addiction is. This was a huge area of contention for my family and me regarding my father's use of alcohol. My memory could not be 100% accurate, but I recall my mother and my father, more so my father, having at least, I don't know how many cocktails every day, 10 high bourbon, fucking gross, the grossest liquor ever. Oh, it's so disgusting. But I also remember this is so weird, but the consistency of the ice cubes after being in their drinks were sort of porous and not hard. They were just, and I just used to love to eat those ice cubes.
That's so funny.
Loved them. My brother definitely, I don't know. I don't really know. I don't really know what his deal was with stuff, but I definitely know that there was everybody in my family, I think, no, not everybody. I smoked cigarettes. Not my older sister, my brother, my sister did. There was definitely some marijuana use, and I don't know about other stuff. They kind of worked hard to keep. I was never at their level, so I can't really answer that. And I always felt that my father had a drinking problem. I can't 100% say about my brother. I mean, I know. I don't know. Yeah, and then outside of that, I don't know. I can't. I would say Irish and German. So, yeah. So.
And I think that's also something, I mean, it goes back to at that time, people really weren't talking about that, like addiction as openly as people do now, even if, we still, I'm sure, find out things that you're like, wait, that was going on, at that time. But it was just so much, I don't want to say normalized, but talking about those kind of things.
Yeah, no, not
as much as like even like mental health too, like those areas of like what people were really struggling with was just so often swept under the rug.
Yeah, I mean, even when I started having suicidal ideation, and then I started having some really some gestures, I guess we will call them. It was the only reason I got help was because I had a friend in high school whose mother was a school psychologist. And she was one of my best friends, not the mother, the girl was one of my best friends. And I was at her house and I had a total meltdown. And her mom talked me through it and then ended up calling my mother and saying, you need to get your daughter into counseling. And my mother she never talked to me about the phone call, but she was not pleased. And I remember her saying, I will take you, I will pay for it, but you have to find your own therapist. And not like, oh, because this is someone you're going to work with. It wasn't like that. She was pissed.
Yeah. Wow. And that's so crazy too. It's like, is it like a reputation thing? Like you're saying too, like with the diabetes, like you were saying before, like, is it something you didn't want to speak about? You didn't want it going around the neighborhood, whatever the motivation was, it was there that it was like clearly not spoken about.
It felt, like another example, is when I overdosed intentionally when I was 16, and we kind of talked about this last week. And I ended up in a psych facility for quite some time. And I remember one time I called my mom at work, and somebody else. I knew everybody at my mom's work by voice because I would call my mom all the time because I was a kid. And I forget who answered the phone, and she said, "Oh, are you at home?" And I was like, "No, I'm in the hospital." And she says, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I said, "Oh, my mom knows I'm here." Like I had been in the hospital for weeks.
Right.
And it was a big secret.
Wow. And which is just like crazy because you think about this nowadays, right? So like the things that we see, there's so much support out there, which also, I mean, just to put it in there, if you are listening and you are somebody who struggles with addiction, with suicide, we'll put some links below for helplines, and definitely, you know, of course, never hesitate to reach out to us or to hear to their wellness to get help as well.
Right. Ever. Always around.
Always around. Anything else you wanna go over, you wanna highlight, or just kind of to speak to addiction and your experience with it and getting through it?
So the most important thing with it, really with anything, with any, so if we put addiction into a goal setting context, the idea really is that the long-term goal has to be more important and of more value than the immediate gratification. And if that is not the case, you or anybody, we will never hit that long-term goal because we're too busy worrying about immediate gratification. So if I look at my oldest son, for example, he plays Fortnite and he likes V-Bucks, which I don't really understand what they are because I don't play Fortnite, but it's some sort of currency that they use to buy skins and weapons and dances and whatever. And he gets allowance and he'll say, Mom, I want to buy this skin. And I'll be like, oh, okay, well, your allowance is on Friday, so do whatever you got to do. But then later he'll say, but I want to buy this thing too. And I'll say, well, you get an allowance every week. You can save your money. And he'll say, yeah, no. So for me, that's an opportunity to teach him that. So if what you want right now is clearly more important than what you would have to save for a few weeks. So you don't get to come back and complain that you don't have it because I gave you the opportunity to save money for it, but you chose this, V-Bucks to buy skins or whatever. There's a quote that a lot of people in the eating disorder arena do not like, but it's something like, does skinny feel better than that piece of cheesecake tastes? And obviously eating disorder and body image and all that is so much more complicated than that statement. But I feel like the idea is still kind of there. Now, the immediate gratification can be for symptom relief. It can be the coping strategy, can be a gazillion different things that when we look at it, it makes sense. But at the end of the day, the long-term goal is less important than the immediate gratification, whatever it is. You will have a very difficult time getting there. And you have to remind yourself of that regularly. Off of methadone was not pleasant. I didn't enjoy it. And I've had to withdraw from medication since then. I get hurt here, have a baby here, cancer there. I've been on opiates off and on for a long time. And every time I get to that point where I'm asking for more and I have to make the decision, do I really need more or do I just like more?
Yeah.
And and every single time I do the same bullshit. I look up, how can I recreate the feelings of opiates naturally? Every fucking time, every time I've done this, for years. At the end of the day, once I'm off of it and I'm doing the things I need to be doing regarding health and eating and supplements and, meditation and breathing and all those healthy, crunchy things, feel better. And then I don't feel like I need to have opiates any longer because I'm able to feel good in my own skin.
Yeah. And that also is, of course, going to look different for everybody, right? We're talking about the goals you're setting and what you're, it's, I think that's also something is not to compare what your road to recovery looks like to others, you have that experience and that, it's so unique to everybody and how you're getting there. And you hear about the success stories and I'm sure it must be so frustrating to be like, why can't I just do that? It's like our brains, you look at it and you're like, why am I wired this way? But it's so different and so unique, the experience for everybody.
Right. And that's when it goes back, if we get into the whole idea of, our purpose and why we're here and why we have negative core beliefs and why we have these really difficult challenges and why are kids abused and why do people go hungry? And there's a whole philosophy around all of this. And at the end of the day, we are here on this planet at this time and place to learn about relationships. And the first relationship is the one we have with ourselves. And if we don't have healthy coping strategies and we start using maladaptive coping strategies, that's a problem. And so it's, we can make these things so intricate. They're so interwoven. Nothing happens in a silo. And I think that we don't spend a lot of time really talking about that, especially in the West. It's, oh, you're an addict because of this or that.
Yeah.
Well, if you listen to any addict story. So I worked for quite some time with sex offenders. And so years ago, there was research that was fabricated that said it was like 80% of all sex offenders had been sexually assaulted. Okay, so that's a lie. That's not true. But I will tell you that every single person I worked with, some sort of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of them. Maybe not sexual, but they watched their mom get the shit beat out of them. They, were put in the system at a young age. I had one guy who he was ignored for years. Never do anything right. And when he was a teenager, they just didn't pay attention to him. They just said, go up to your room. And so on the outside, was that trauma? I mean, maybe people would say no, but it's going to fuck you up.
Of course. Of course. And this is also, I mean, to talk about the relationship with self, a lot of things you're mentioning is in our self-talk module that's on our website, which is, we can link that to in the bio. But that's it's a 21-day, like really self-guided kind of program that goes through the hardest and also simplest thing is how you talk to yourself, right? Like, how do you, it's completely under your control, but sometimes feels like it isn't. And it's just such a good module for really looking like at your relationship with self, at how you treat yourself, and then how that translates, of course, to others. So that's, I think, definitely, worth checking out. If this sounds like something that's interesting for you, our dear listeners here. So this is our episode 2, week 2. We are obviously, can talk about this for so much longer, but we'll wrap it up here. And then there will be, of course, next week we'll be coming in with a new episode. And definitely, again, if this is interesting for you, if you know somebody who's struggling with these kind of things, feel free to either reach out to us. There's some, of course, helplines, and then keep coming back. I mean, these are the kind of topics that we hope to be covering more of, not just Megan's experience, but just, how that can be applied to everyday life. So definitely hope you keep coming back. We hope to see you again next week for another, maybe I'll sing more Michael Jackson next week. I don't know what that'll look like. But we definitely appreciate you coming here to listen.
Thank you so much.